The rain had not yet started when Eliza Whitmore walked out of her father's house for the last time. She carried nothing, not the sewing box her mother had left her, not the bundle of letters from her sister in Bath, not even the wool cloak that hung on its peg by the kitchen door. She walked out in her morning dress, cotton sleeves already damp from the mist rolling in off the Hampshire Downs, and she did not look back. Not once. Behind her, Sir Gerald Whitmore stood in the doorway of Thornfield Lodge, his mouth still open around the word, ungrateful. The candle in the hall behind him threw his shadow long across the gravel drive, a dark finger reaching after her. He did not follow. He had never followed anything in his life that did not come when called. The gate at the end of the drive was iron, heavy, and it groaned when she pushed it open. The sound was louder than she expected, a low, grinding protest that seemed to come from the earth itself. She stepped through it and onto the lane, and that was when the rain began. Not gently, not as a warning. It arrived like a verdict, sudden and total, turning the packed dirt to mud beneath her shoes in seconds. She had no plan. This was important to understand about Eliza Whitmore. She had not spent weeks considering her options or writing careful letters to distant relatives. She had been sitting at the breakfast table, eating a boiled egg, when her father had set down his teacup and said the words that cracked her life in two. Lord Ashford has accepted the terms. You will marry him before Michaelmas, or you will leave this house. She had looked at the egg, at the small silver spoon in her hand, at the precise crack she had made in the shell, a clean line running north to south, like a meridian on a globe. Then she had set the spoon down, pushed back her chair, and walked to the front door. That was 7 minutes ago. Now she was standing in the rain on a country lane in Hampshire with no money, no cloak, and no destination. Her hair was already plastered to her neck. Her shoes, thin-soled, meant for polished floors, were sinking into the mud with each step. She kept walking. The lane ran south toward the village of Hartwell, which was 3 miles away, and contained exactly one inn, one church, and Mrs. Pratchett's lending library. Eliza had been to all three and owed money at none of them, which was the only advantage she could claim at that moment. She had 4pence in her dress pocket. She always kept coins there, a habit her mother had taught her. A woman who cannot buy her own bread is a woman who cannot leave a room, her mother had said, and Eliza had not understood what that meant until this morning. 4pence would buy her a meal, not a room, not a coach ticket, not a new life. She was calculating the exact distance she could travel on 4pence when she heard the hoofbeats behind her. They were quick, not a trot, but a canter, reckless on the wet road. She moved to the edge of the lane without turning around. Whoever it was could pass. She would not look back at Thornfield, not even indirectly, not even at a horse that might have come from its stable. The horse did not pass. It slowed to a walk beside her, and a voice she did not recognize said, "You are going to catch your death." "Then I shall catch it walking forward," she said, and did not look up. "Miss Whitmore." The voice was low, unhurried, and carried an authority that had nothing to do with volume. "I watched you leave, from the window of your father's study." Now she looked. The man on the horse was tall. She could see that even with him mounted. Dark hair, rain-flattened against his forehead. A jaw that looked as though it had been designed for the specific purpose of clenching. He wore a riding coat that was already darkening with water, and his boots were the kind that cost more than her father's annual wine account. She had never seen him before in her life. "You were in my father's study," she said. It was not a question. "I was?" "Then you heard what he said to me." "I did." "And you followed me out." She stopped walking. The rain ran down her face like tears she refused to produce herself. "Why?" He dismounted. It was a fluid motion, one boot out of the stirrup, a swing, and then he was on the ground beside her. And she realized he was taller than she had thought. His eyes were dark, almost black in the low light, and they were looking at her with an expression she could not immediately categorize. Not pity, not amusement. Something more careful than either. "Because you left without a cloak," he said. "And I have one." He unfastened the oilskin from behind his saddle and held it out to her. It was heavy, waxed, the kind of thing a man carried who expected to ride in all weather. She did not take it. "Who are you?" "My name is Lord Ashford." He said it the way a man says it is raining, a fact of weather, nothing more. "I believe I am the man you were told to marry." The silence that followed was not empty. It was thick, like the air before a thunderclap, charged with everything she had just done and everything she was now understanding about it. She had walked out of her father's house to avoid marrying a man she had never met, and that man had followed her into the rain. Eliza looked at the oilskin cloak, at his hand holding it, large, steady, the knuckles slightly reddened from the cold. Then she looked at his face and made the kind of decision she would later describe to her sister as, "the moment I became permanently unreasonable." She took the cloak. She did not put it on. She folded it over her arm and kept walking. He stood in the rain behind her for 3 full seconds. She counted. Then his boots began moving again, and the horse's hooves followed. A strange, wet procession of 2 people and 1 horse, heading south on a lane that led nowhere either of them had planned to go. "You are walking to the village," he said, catching up to her stride. "I am walking away from that house. The village happens to be in the direction away qualifies as." "You have no money." "I have 4pence. 4pence will not get you to London." "4pence will get me bread. I have found that bread is a surprisingly effective starting point for most plans." He was quiet for a moment. She could hear his breathing, slightly elevated, as though the act of following a woman through the rain required a different kind of exertion than he was accustomed to. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted. The authority was still there, but underneath it was something that sounded almost like curiosity. "Your father told me you were difficult." "My father thinks any woman who reads the newspaper is difficult." "He said you had opinions." "I have observations. Opinions require an audience that listens. I have not yet found one." He made a sound that might have been a laugh, strangled at birth by good breeding. "He also said you were pretty," which I assumed was the relevant qualification. Eliza stopped. She turned and looked at him full in the face, rain streaming between them, and her expression was the one her sister called the look that precedes furniture being rearranged. It was not anger, exactly. It was something more architectural. The face of a woman surveying a structure she was about to demolish. "Lord Ashford," she said, "you are standing in the rain. Your horse is miserable. Your coat is ruined. You have followed a woman who walked out of her own home rather than agree to meet you. And you are telling me that my father sold my primary qualification as pretty." She held the oilskin cloak out to him. "Take your cloak back. I would rather be wet than indebted to a man who thinks that is a compliment." He did not take it. He looked at the cloak, then at her, and his expression did something she was not prepared for. It cracked. Not dramatically, not a collapse or a revelation. Just a small fissure in the stone face, a micro-shift around the eyes that said, "I did not expect you." "Keep the cloak," he said. "Consider it an apology." "For what?" "For reputing your father's words as though they were mine." He took the horse's reins and turned south. "I'm going to the inn at Hartwell. You may walk with me, or you may walk behind me, but you are not walking alone in this weather." "I was doing perfectly well alone." "You were doing stubbornly. That is not the same thing." She wanted to argue. The wanting was physical. A tightness in her jaw, a heat in her sternum, the particular muscular readiness of a woman who has trained herself to fight with words because nothing else was available to her. But the rain was getting worse, and her shoes were already ruined, and the man was walking away from her at a pace that suggested he genuinely did not care whether she followed. Eliza put on the cloak. She hated herself for it for approximately 11 seconds. which was how long it took the oilskin to stop the rain from running down her spine. Then, she followed him. They did not speak for the first half-mile. The lane narrowed where the hedgerows grew thick, and they walked single file, him leading the horse, her behind, the cloak enormous on her frame, its hem dragging in the mud. The only sounds were rain on leaves, hooves on dirt, and the occasional complaint from the horse, who was expressing its feelings about the weather with the candor of an animal that has never been taught to suppress its opinions. It was Eliza who broke the silence. "You were in his study. You heard the terms." "I heard them." "What were they?" Lord Ashford did not turn around. "Your father offered your hand in exchange for the cancellation of his debts, which are considerable." "How considerable?" £1,200. The number landed in her stomach like a stone. £1,200. Her father owed £1,200, and he had offered her as currency. She had known he was in debt. The wine had gotten cheaper, the servants fewer, the fires smaller each winter. But £1,200 was not debt. It was ruin wearing a polite face. "And you accepted?" she said. "I accepted the meeting. I had not yet accepted the terms." "What is the difference?" He did turn now, and his face was unreadable in the rain-darkened light. "The difference is that I came to meet the woman before I agreed to anything, which is why I was in the study when you walked out." "You came to inspect me?" "I came to have a conversation." "With a woman you were considering purchasing for £1,200? The word purchasing hit the air like a slap. She watched him receive it. A slight tightening around the mouth, a fractional lift of the chin. He did not deny it. "Yes," he said. "I understand how it appears." "It appears that way because that is what it is." They had reached the crest of the hill, where the lane began its descent toward Hartwell. Below them, the village was a smudge of grey stone and yellow lamplight through the rain. The inn, the Crossed Keys, sat at the near edge, its signs swinging in the wind. Lord Ashford stopped. "May I ask you something?" "You have been asking me things since you mounted that horse." "Why did you leave?" She stared at him. "He told me to marry a stranger or leave." Many women would have chosen the stranger, particularly the one who came with a title and an income. Many women have not spent their lives watching what happens to women who choose the stranger. She pulled the cloak tighter. It smelled of saddle leather and something else. Bergamot, maybe, or cedar, something that belonged to the man who wore it. "My mother married the stranger. She died in that house, Lord Ashford. Not of illness. Of smallness. Of a life that shrank around her year by year until there was nothing left of her that was her own. I will not inherit that." The rain eased slightly, as though the sky itself was pausing to listen. He stood in the gap between weather and silence and looked at her, and for the first time, his expression was fully legible. It was recognition. Not attraction, not admiration. Recognition. The face of a man who has just heard his own diagnosis spoken aloud by a stranger. "Come to the inn," he said. "I will pay for a room and a meal. You owe me nothing for it. I am offering because the alternative is that you sleep in a hedgerow, and I am not capable of riding home knowing that." "I am perfectly capable of sleeping in a hedgerow." "I have no doubt. But the hedgerow has done nothing to deserve it." She almost smiled. The almost was important. It lived in the corners of her mouth, a twitch she suppressed by pressing her lips together, a betrayal of the body that the will was not quick enough to prevent. He saw it. She knew he saw it, because his own mouth did something similar, and for a single second, they were two people standing in the rain, almost smiling at each other, and the almost was more dangerous than any actual smile could have been. They went to the inn. The Crossed Keys was small, warm, and smelled of wood smoke and boiled mutton. The landlord, a man named Briggs with a face like a friendly potato, took one look at Lord Ashford's boots and produced his best room, his driest towels, and a bowl of soup that arrived before either of them had finished dripping on his floorboards. Eliza sat at a table near the fire and ate the soup with the concentrated focus of someone who had just walked 3 miles in the rain on a boiled egg and fourpence. It was good soup, thick, with barley and carrots, and enough salt to make her eyes water. Or perhaps her eyes were watering for other reasons. She chose not to investigate. Lord Ashford sat across from her. He had removed his coat and was in his shirt sleeves, white linen, slightly translucent from the damp, clinging to shoulders that were broader than his riding coat had suggested. She noticed this, and was furious with herself for noticing it. "You cannot stay at this inn indefinitely," he said. "I am aware. Your father will not take you back without conditions. I am aware of that too. Do you have family elsewhere, a friend, anyone who would take you in?" "My sister is in Bath. She married a curate. Their house has 3 rooms and 4 children." Eliza set down her spoon. "I am not a puzzle for you to solve, Lord Ashford. I walked out. The consequences are mine." "The consequences are your father's. He created the situation." "And I chose to leave it. That makes it mine." She picked up the spoon again, then put it down. "Why are you still here?" "I told you. I will not ride home knowing— No. Why are you here? In Hampshire? You are a duke's. You are an earl, at minimum, judging by those boots. What possible interest could you have in a gentleman's daughter from a house with no footman and a wine cellar that has been empty since Trafalgar?" He leaned back in his chair. The firelight caught the planes of his face. Sharp cheekbone, strong nose, that jaw. His eyes were not black, she realized now. They were dark brown, almost amber in the warmth of the fire, and they were looking at her with an intensity that made her want to check whether her soup had something in it. "I am the Duke of Ashford," he said, "and my interest is not in your father's house or his wine cellar." "Then what?" "I read a letter." "A letter?" "Written by you to your sister. Your father showed it to me as evidence of your— I believe his word was temperament. It was 3 pages long. It described the drainage problem in the South Field, proposed a solution using redirected stream water, calculated the projected yield increase, and included a footnote about the migratory patterns of swallows in Hampshire. Eliza felt heat climb her neck. That letter. She had written it on a Tuesday afternoon when the rain kept her indoors, and she had nothing to occupy her mind except the South Field's persistent flooding and the swallows that nested in the barn eaves. She had not intended it as a document of quantification. She had intended it as a letter to her sister, who enjoyed hearing about swallows. "Your father thought it proved you were odd," the Duke said. "I thought it proved you were the most interesting person in Hampshire." The fire crackled. A log shifted, sending a small cascade of sparks upward. Eliza sat very still. The kind of stillness that was not calm, but was instead the physical expression of a woman who had just been handed something she did not know what to do with. "That is a dangerous thing to say to a woman with 4pence and no cloak," she said. "You have a cloak. I gave it to you." "I have your cloak. That is different." He held her gaze. "Is it?" She looked away first. This was a tactical retreat, not a surrender. She needed to look at the fire, at the soup, at anything that was not the Duke of Ashford's face in firelight, saying things that made her 4pence feel like a fortune. "I need to think," she said. "Take the room. Think in the morning. I will stay elsewhere." "Where?" "Briggs has a settee in the back parlour that he assures me has only given splinters to 3 previous guests." "You would sleep on a settee?" "I have slept in worse places." He stood. "You are safe here. No one from Thornfield knows where you are. I will not tell your father. Tomorrow, if you wish, I will arrange a coach to take you to Bath." "And if I do not wish to go to Bath?" He paused. The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them was ready to name. "Then we will discuss alternatives," he said. "In the morning, after you have slept and eaten something that is not soup. He went to the door. His hand was on the latch when she said, "Lord Ashford." He turned. The drainage solution would work. I did the calculations twice. Something shifted in his face. That crack again, wider this time, letting through a warmth that his jaw and his posture and his very expensive boots were all designed to conceal. "I have no doubt," he said. And then he was gone. And Eliza was alone with the fire and the soup, and the very specific problem of a man who had followed her into the rain, and then given her space to be angry about it. She slept badly, not because the bed was uncomfortable. It was the best bed she had slept in since the year her father stopped maintaining the upper floors, but because her mind would not stop making lists, options, calculations, the kind of arithmetic a woman does when her entire life has been reduced to fourpence and a borrowed cloak, and the offer of a coach to Bath. Bath meant Margaret's house. 3 rooms, 4 children, a curate's salary, and the certain knowledge that she would be a burden. Margaret would never say it. Margaret would give her the smallest child's bed and insist she stay forever. And it would be an act of love that slowly transformed into an act of mutual suffocation. Eliza knew this because she knew Margaret, and she knew herself, and she knew that 2 strong women in 3 rooms was a recipe for grief wearing an apron. London meant governess work, if she was lucky, companion work, if she was not. Both meant servitude with better vocabulary, a life of standing at the edge of other people's rooms, permitted to observe, but never to occupy. She had watched her mother's cousin do this for 30 years. The woman had developed a permanent expression of pleasantness that was indistinguishable from despair. The third option was the one she kept circling back to, the one that sat in her mind like a stone in a shoe, impossible to ignore, painful to examine. The Duke of Ashford had not actually proposed. He had said he had not yet accepted the terms, which was not the same as rejecting them. He had followed her, given her a cloak, bought her soup, and slept on a settee. These were not the actions of a man conducting a business transaction. They were the actions of a man who had read a letter about swallows and drainage and decided it constituted a reason to ride through a rainstorm. She turned over in the bed. The sheets smelled of lavender and lye. Outside, the rain had softened to a steady murmur against the glass, and somewhere below her, a door opened and closed. Briggs, probably, or the Duke moving restlessly on his splintered settee. She thought about the letter. She had written it in March, when the ice was melting, and the South Field flooded for the 3rd consecutive year. She had described the problem with the precision of someone who had walked the field herself, measured the gradient, and noticed that the old Roman drainage ditch along the eastern boundary had been blocked by a fallen elm. The solution was obvious. Clear the ditch, redirect the seasonal runoff into the existing streambed. The yield increase would pay for the labor in one harvest. The swallows were an afterthought, a paragraph about the pair that had returned to the same beam in the barn for the 4th year running, and whether this constituted loyalty or merely habit. Her father had called it peculiar correspondence. He had shown it to the Duke as proof that his daughter was not marriage material, an exhibit in the case against her, and the Duke had read it and ridden to Hampshire. Morning arrived grey and damp, the kind of English morning that could not commit to either rain or sun. Eliza dressed in her mud-stiffened clothes, there were no others, and went downstairs to find the Duke already seated at the same table, drinking tea with the posture of a man who had not slept at all. "The settee," she said, sitting across from him, "delivered on its promise. I counted 7 splinters." He pushed a plate of bread and butter toward her. "Eat, then tell me what you have decided." She ate. The bread was fresh. Briggs's wife baked it, and it was warm, and the butter was the good kind, yellow with cream. And she ate 3 slices before she trusted herself to speak without her voice doing something undignified. "I have decided nothing," she said. "But I have questions." "Ask them." "Why did my father owe you money?" The Duke set down his teacup. "He does not owe me money. He owes money to a syndicate of creditors, of which I am the largest. He took loans against the estate 3 years ago when the harvest failed. The interest has compounded. And you suggested marriage as settlement? No, your father suggested it. I was there to discuss restructuring the debt. This shifted something in her understanding. She had assumed the marriage was his idea, a titled man purchasing a wife at a discount. But if her father had offered, he volunteered me. He presented it as a mutual benefit. I would gain a wife. He would lose a debt. And what did you say? I said I would meet you first. That is not an answer. It is the only honest one. I do not make decisions about people I have not met. He looked at her across the table, and his eyes in daylight were definitely brown, warm and steady, and she was annoyed by the steadiness, because it made her own turbulence feel unearned. I came to Hampshire to see whether the woman who wrote that letter was real, and then she walked past me and out the front door, and I had my answer. Eliza felt something in her chest that she did not like. It was warm and expanding, and it had no business being there at this stage of the proceedings. She pressed it down with the flat of her will, the way she pressed wrinkles out of linen. I will not marry for debt, she said. Good. Neither would I. I will not be inspected, approved, and installed like new curtains. I do not need new curtains. Then what do you need? He considered this. Not performatively. She could see the actual thinking happening behind his eyes, the careful selection of words by a man who understood that the wrong ones would send her back into the rain. I need someone who sees what is broken and fixes it, not because she is told to, because she cannot bear not to. That is a housekeeper, Lord Ashford, not a wife. The distinction in most marriages I've observed is alarmingly narrow. He paused. I am proposing something different. You are proposing. Not yet. I am proposing that you come to Ashford Park, not as my betrothed, not as a guest bound by obligation, as a woman who needs a place to live that is not a hedgerow, and who possesses skills that my estate desperately requires. You are offering me employment. I am offering you a trial. 3 months. You manage the household, which has not been properly managed since my mother died 4 years ago. The estate needs exactly the kind of mind that writes 3-page letters about drainage. If, after 3 months, you wish to leave, I will give you a reference, and £50 and a coach to wherever you wish to go. And if I do not wish to leave? His mouth did the thing again, the crack, the warmth breaking through, the almost smile that was more devastating than any full one. Then we will have that conversation. She should have said no. Every principle she had walked out of Thornfield to defend was screaming at her to say no. A woman did not move into a man's house under any terms. Society would assume the worst. Her father would claim victory. Margaret would write concerned letters in careful handwriting. But Eliza Whitmore was a woman who made irreversible decisions. And this morning, sitting in an inn with breadcrumbs on her fingers and a borrowed cloak over her chair, she made another one. 3 months, she said. I manage the household. You do not manage me. Agreed. I answer to no one about my methods. That may be difficult for the cook to accept. The cook will adapt. The cook has been there for 26 years and has adapted to nothing since the introduction of the potato. Eliza almost smiled again. She could feel it happening. The treacherous twitch at the corners of her mouth, the body's insistence on responding to this man despite the will's explicit instructions not to. I will manage the cook, she said. I have managed worse. You have managed your father. Exactly. They left the inn after breakfast. The Duke had a carriage sent from his estate. It arrived mid-morning, driven by a man named Hobbs, who looked at Eliza with the careful blankness of a servant who has seen many unexpected women arrive at his master's side, and has learned to express no opinion about any of them. Ashford Park was 12 miles north of Hartwell. The carriage turned off the main road onto a private lane lined with elms, ancient ones, their canopies meeting overhead to form a green tunnel that filtered the morning light into something cathedral-like. Eliza pressed her face to the window and counted the trees. There were 47. The house appeared gradually. First the chimneys, then the roofline, then the full facade. Grey stone, Georgian symmetry. Ivy climbing the west wing with the patient ambition of a plant that intended to eventually consume the building entirely. It was beautiful and slightly neglected, like a woman who had once been meticulous about her appearance and had recently stopped trying. "The roof on the east wing leaks," the Duke said, as though reading her thoughts. "Since when?" "2 winters ago. My steward recommended patching it. I recommended replacing it. We compromised by doing neither." The front door was opened by a housekeeper named Mrs. Blackwell, who was approximately 60 years old and approximately 4 feet 11 inches tall, and who looked at Eliza with an expression that managed to convey welcome, assessment, and warning simultaneously. Eliza liked her immediately. "This is Miss Whitmore," the Duke said. "She will be managing the household for the next 3 months." Mrs. Blackwell's eyebrow rose by exactly 1/8 of an inch. Managing. Managing. She has full authority over domestic operations. The cook will not like that. The cook's preferences are no longer the organizing principle of this household. Mrs. Blackwell turned to Eliza. Her eyes were sharp, the pale blue of a winter sky, and they conducted a complete assessment in approximately 4 seconds. "Can you keep accounts?" "I can." "Can you manage a staff of 14 who have not been properly managed in 4 years?" "I managed a household of 6 on a budget that would not cover your candle expenditure. 14 will be an adjustment of scale, not of kind." Mrs. Blackwell's other eyebrow joined the first. "Well," she said, "this should be interesting." The first week was war. Not the dramatic kind. Not confrontation or shouting or the clash of opposed wills. It was the quiet, grinding war of systems against chaos, of a woman who wanted order, entering a house that had forgotten what order looked like. The kitchen was Mrs. Crawford's domain, and Mrs. Crawford had been cooking at Ashford Park since before the Duke's father died. She was a large woman, with red hands, and an opinion about everything that was expressed primarily through the medium of slamming cabinet doors. She did not take kindly to Eliza's suggestion that the weekly menus be planned in advance. "I have never planned a menu," Mrs. Crawford said, her arms folded across her flour-dusted apron. "That is evident from the meals." The cabinet slam that followed rattled 3 windows. Eliza did not flinch. She stood in the kitchen with her mother's posture, spine straight, chin level, hands clasped at her waist, and waited for the echo to die. "Mrs. Crawford," she said, "you are an excellent cook. The bread I have eaten this week is the best I have tasted. The roast on Tuesday was exceptional. But you are cooking without a plan, which means you are spending 30% more than necessary on ingredients that arrive by impulse rather than by design." "I cook what needs cooking." "You cook what you feel like cooking. There is a difference. One feeds a household, the other feeds a habit." Mrs. Crawford's face went through several colors. Eliza watched them pass. Red, redder, a fascinating magenta, and waited. She had learned from her mother that the loudest silence in a room always belongs to the person who is not speaking, and she was very, very good at not speaking. "1 week," Mrs. Crawford said finally. "I will try your menus for 1 week." 2 weeks. 1 week proves nothing except that change is uncomfortable. "You are a difficult woman, Miss Whitmore." "I have been told." The menus were a success. Within 2 weeks, the kitchen budget dropped by a quarter. The meals improved because ingredients were fresh instead of improvised. And Mrs. Crawford developed a grudging respect for Eliza that she expressed by slamming cabinets only at medium volume. The Duke observed all of this from a careful distance. He ate in the dining room. She ate in the kitchen. Her choice, not his. He did not interfere with her decisions. He did not question her authority. He appeared in doorways, occasionally, watching her negotiate with the gardener about the overgrown hedges, or instruct the maids about the particular way she wanted the library cleaned. Carefully, because the books were more valuable than anything else in the house, and she had found 3 first editions covered in dust so thick it had developed its own ecosystem. It was on the 9th day that she found the room. The east wing, the one with the leaking roof, was mostly closed off. Sheets covered the furniture. Dust lay in drifts along the baseboards. But at the end of the corridor, behind a door that stuck when she pushed it, was a room that was not dusty at all. It was a study, small, with a window that faced south, and it was filled with papers, not scattered, organized, stacked in careful piles on the desk, the chair, and a portion of the floor. The papers were covered in handwriting she recognized. The Duke's. She had seen his hand on the household accounts, precise, slightly angular, the handwriting of a man who thought before he wrote. She should not have read them. She knew that. She read them anyway. They were plans, estate plans, detailed, meticulous, obsessive. Drainage diagrams for every field, crop rotation schedules spanning 10 years, tenant housing improvements with cost projections, a redesign of the dairy operation that would double output, plans for a school for the estate children, with a curriculum, a salary for the teacher, and a sketch of the building that was not particularly good, but was drawn with the unmistakable care of someone who meant it. Every plan was complete. Every plan was unfiled. None of them had been implemented. She heard his step in the corridor and did not pretend she had not been reading. When he appeared in the doorway, she was holding the drainage plan for the South Fields. His South Fields, not her father's. And her face was the one Margaret called the terrifying version of interested. "You wrote these," she said. "Obviously." "They are good." "Thank you." "They are 4 years old." His jaw tightened. He leaned against the doorframe, not casually, but as though the frame was the only thing between him and a conversation he did not want to have. "My mother died 4 years ago. She ran the estate. Everything you are finding, the neglect, the chaos, the cook's dictatorship, that is what happens when the person who held everything together disappears and no one steps in to replace her. You could have stepped in." "I tried." The words came out rough, like they had been stored somewhere dry and had cracked from disuse. "I wrote those plans the year she died, every one of them, and then I could not. I could not make myself carry them out. Every time I tried, I was in her study, using her desk, filling the space she had occupied, and I could not breathe in that room." Eliza set the papers down. She looked at him, really looked, past the jaw and the boots and the controlled voice, and she saw it. Grief. Not the fresh kind that weeps and wails. The old kind, the kind that has calcified into paralysis, that has turned a capable man into a spectator of his own life. "Your mother sounds extraordinary," she said. She was. "And you have been punishing yourself for not being her." His head came up. The words had hit something. She could see the impact, the flinch that was not quite a flinch, the way his fingers tightened on the doorframe. "I am not punishing myself. You wrote a 10-year crop rotation plan and left it in a pile on the floor. You designed a school and never built it. You have spent 4 years surrounded by solutions you created and refused to implement. That is not grief, Lord Ashford. That is penance. And it is not serving anyone, not your tenants, not your estate, and not your mother's memory." The silence was absolute. The kind of silence that follows a detonation, when the air itself is recovering from what has been said. He stared at her, and she could see the moment when his expression changed, when the careful, controlled mask slipped, and underneath it was something raw and real, and desperately tired. "You have been here 9 days," he said, "and you have already seen—" He stopped, swallowed, started again. "My steward has worked here for 12 years and has never said anything close to that." "Your steward is not being paid to be honest. I am not being paid at all." He made the sound again, the almost laugh, except this time it was shakier, and it had more grief in it than humor. "The drainage plan would work," he said. "I did the calculations." "Twice?" "3 times." "Show me the fields tomorrow." "It is supposed to rain." "Then we will get wet. I seem to recall that is how we met." He looked at her. She looked at him. The room was small and full of his mother's ghost and his father's debt, and 4 years of plans that had never become anything. And between them was a charged, precarious, terrifying thing that neither of them was willing to name. "Tomorrow," he said. "After breakfast." "After breakfast," she agreed. They walked the estate the next morning in a light rain that could not decide whether it was drizzle or mist. He showed her the south fields, flooded just as she had predicted from his plans. The blocked drainage ditch, the fallen elm that caused it. She knelt in the mud in her only dress and traced the old Roman stonework with her fingers, feeling the engineering of people who had been dead for 1,500 years and had still solved this problem better than anyone since. "Clear the elm. Relay the stones where they have shifted. Redirect the overflow into the lower stream bed." She stood up, her knees brown with mud. 3 men, 2 weeks. The field is productive by autumn. "You are kneeling in mud." "I am kneeling in a solution. There is a difference." He helped her up. His hand was warm, and his grip was firm, and he held on for exactly 1 second longer than necessary. She noticed. He noticed that she noticed. They both pretended not to notice that the other had noticed, which was a level of mutual awareness that would have been comical if it had not been so precisely calibrated to cause maximum damage to both their composures. Over the next weeks, she implemented his plans. Not all of them. Some were outdated, some needed revision. But the drainage project, the kitchen garden redesign, the repair schedule for the tenant cottages. She worked with his steward, Mr. Graves, who turned out to be a decent man, imprisoned by 12 years of inertia. She met the tenants, who looked at her with suspicion that melted into cautious hope when she asked them what they needed, instead of telling them what they would get. The Duke watched. He helped, increasingly, appearing with tools, with ledgers, with questions that were really offers of partnership disguised as curiosity. They argued about the dairy redesign. She thought his projections were optimistic. He thought her caution was excessive. They compromised on a phased implementation that annoyed them both equally. They disagreed about the school curriculum. She wanted mathematics for girls. He wanted Latin for everyone. They eventually agreed on both, plus geography, because neither of them could resist adding things. They were in the library when it happened. A Tuesday evening, 6 weeks into her 3 months. She was cataloguing the books. The real ones, the first editions, the beautiful, damaged things that had been collecting dust. And he was reading by the fire. The room was quiet, except for the sound of pages turning and the scratch of her pen on the inventory list. "There is a Shakespeare folio behind the agricultural section," she said, without looking up. "First edition, 1623. It has water damage on the spine, but the pages are intact." He set down his book. "You found a first folio?" "It was behind a copy of Improving the Condition of Turnips. Someone was using it as a bookend." "That would have been my grandfather. He believed fiction was a waste of shelf space." "Your grandfather was a Philistine." "My grandfather was a duke. They are frequently the same thing." She turned to face him, and the firelight caught her, caught the ink stain on her left thumb, caught the dust in her hair from the top shelf, caught the particular expression she wore when she was excited about something and trying very hard not to show it. He was looking at her, the way he had looked at her that first night in the inn, with recognition, with that careful, devastating attention. Except now there were 6 weeks of arguments and drainage ditches and shared meals between them, and the looking meant something different. "The folio is worth more than my father's debt," she said. "I know." "You could sell it." "I could." "Why haven't you?" "Because my mother loved it. She used to read the sonnets aloud in this room." He paused. "I have not opened it since she died." Eliza set down her pen. She walked to the shelf where the folio sat, enormous and ancient and improbable, and she lifted it carefully, supporting the spine, protecting the damaged corner, and brought it to him. "Read one," she said. Eliza. It was the first time he had used her Christian name. It came out of him like something that had been held underwater and finally allowed to surface, startled, gasping, inevitable. She stood in front of him, holding a book that was older than the house and more valuable than everything in it, and her name in his mouth felt like the most dangerous thing in the room. "Read one," she said again, quieter. He took the book. His fingers brushed hers on the cover, an accident of proximity that neither of them treated as an accident. He opened it to a page he knew by memory, and he read. And his voice in the firelit room was low and rough, and carried the particular weight of a man returning to something he had abandoned out of grief. When he finished, the room was very quiet. Eliza was sitting on the floor beside his chair because there was nowhere else to sit that was close enough, and her shoulder was almost touching his knee, and the almost was doing more work than any actual touch could have done. "Your mother had good taste," she said. "My mother would have liked you." "Most mothers do not like me. I am too loud and too opinionated, and I kneel in mud." "My mother knelt in mud. She redesigned the entire south garden on her hands and knees." His voice cracked on the word garden. It was a small crack, barely audible, but she heard it the way she heard everything about him now, with a precision that frightened her. She reached up and touched his hand where it rested on the arm of the chair. Just her fingers on his knuckles. Light, brief. The kind of touch that says, "I am here," without demanding anything in return. He turned his hand over and held hers. Neither of them spoke. The fire burned. The folio lay open on his lap. Outside, the rain had started again. Soft, persistent. The sound of Hampshire weather doing what it always did, which was whatever it wanted, whenever it wanted, without apology. The trouble arrived on a Thursday, wearing a good coat and an expression of wounded dignity. Sir Gerald Whitmore had discovered where his daughter was living, and he had come to retrieve his investment. Eliza was in the kitchen garden. She had expanded it, adding herbs along the south wall where the stone retained heat, when she heard the carriage. She straightened, soil on her hands, and watched her father step down onto the Duke's gravel drive with the careful precision of a man who believed the world owed him a smooth path. "Eliza." His voice carried the particular tone he used when he wanted something to sound like concern, but was actually a command. "I have come to take you home." "I am home." "This is not your home. This is a man's house, where you are living without propriety and without permission." "I have permission. I have employment. I have a room with a door that locks, and a purpose that does not require your approval." Sir Gerald's face reddened. He was a man who aged badly when angry. The colour climbed his neck like ivy on a wall, patchy and spreading. "You are embarrassing this family. You offered me as currency for a debt you created. The embarrassment preceded my departure." He stepped toward her. Not threateningly. Sir Gerald was not a violent man. But he stepped with the particular confidence of a father who believed proximity equaled authority, who had spent 23 years standing close to his daughter and watching her yield. She did not yield. She stood in the kitchen garden with dirt on her hands and Basil at her feet, and she did not move 1 inch. "The Duke and I have an arrangement," she said. "A professional one. I manage his household. He pays me fairly. At the end of 3 months, I leave, or I stay. That is between me and Lord Ashford, and it does not concern you. It concerns me because you are my daughter. I was your daughter when you offered me for £1,200. You will forgive me if I question the depth of the concern. The Duke appeared. He did not rush. He walked across the gravel with the measured pace of a man who had heard enough from a window and had decided that intervention was now necessary. He was in his work clothes, an old coat, muddied boots, a shirt that had seen better decades, and he looked nothing like a duke, and everything like a man who had been clearing drainage ditches with his own hands, which he had. "Sir Gerald," he said, "you were not invited. I have come for my daughter." "Your daughter is not yours to come for. She is an adult woman in my employ, and she is free to leave or stay as she chooses. She is living in your house, unmarried. Do you have any idea what? I have every idea. I also have a housekeeper, 14 staff, and a reputation that can survive the presence of a competent woman in my household. Can yours survive the story of how she came to be here?" Sir Gerald's mouth opened, closed, opened again. He looked like a fish that had been presented with a philosophical argument and was struggling with the concept. "I came to settle the debt," he said, changing terrain. Not through marriage. I have other means. I'm selling the North Pasture." "The North Pasture will not cover your interest, let alone the principal." "Then what do you suggest?" "I suggest nothing. Your debt is between you and my solicitor. Your daughter is between you and your conscience." The Duke's voice had the quality of a closing door, firm, final, and not interested in what was being shut out. "You may stay for tea, if you can be civil. You may not take Eliza anywhere. And if you raise your voice on my property again, I will have Hobbs drive you back to Thornfield in the rain, which I understand is a family tradition." Sir Gerald left without tea. The carriage disappeared down the elm-lined drive, and Eliza watched it go with her arms folded and her jaw set, and a feeling in her chest that was equal parts fury and relief, and something else. Something that had to do with the Duke's voice saying her name to her father, saying it with a possessiveness that was not about ownership, but about defense. "You did not need to do that," she said when the carriage was gone. "I needed to do exactly that. I was handling him. You were handling him beautifully. I was handling the part where he has legal authority to make your life very difficult. And I have legal authority to make his." She looked at him. Mud on his boots, soil on his hands. He had been in the garden too, before her father arrived, helping her plant the rosemary cuttings. His hair was disordered from wind, and his expression was fierce and tender and completely unguarded, and she realized with a physical jolt, like missing a step on a staircase, that she was in love with him. The realization did not arrive gently. It arrived the way she arrived everywhere, abruptly, without luggage, without a plan, and with the absolute certainty that there was no going back. She did what she always did with impossible situations. She turned and walked back to the kitchen garden and planted 3 more rows of rosemary. He followed her. He knelt in the dirt beside her and planted without speaking, and they worked in silence until the light failed, and the silence was the kindest thing anyone had ever given her. 2 months into the arrangement, the estate had transformed. The drainage was cleared. The south field was dry for the first time in 6 years. The tenant cottages had new roofs. The kitchen ran on a budget and a plan. The library was catalogued. The school, his school, her curriculum, was under construction at the edge of the village. A small stone building that would hold 20 children and 1 teacher, and all the hope that 2 people could pour into a thing without saying why. They were at the school site, reviewing the construction progress, when the rain came again. A sudden downpour, like the one that had started everything, and they ran for the half-built doorway and stood in the frame of a school that did not yet have a roof, laughing and dripping, and closer than they had ever been. "This is familiar," she said. "You are soaking wet and you have no cloak. I have a cloak at the house. I am simply not wearing it because I did not expect to be standing in a door frame in a monsoon. It is Hampshire. You should always expect a monsoon. She laughed. The sound surprised her. It was full, unguarded, the kind of laugh she had not produced since her mother was alive. He was looking at her with an expression that had abandoned all pretense of control, and she could see everything in it. The 4 years of grief, the plans on the study floor, the letter about drainage and swallows, the night in the inn, the morning in the mud, every argument about dairy yields and Latin curricula, and whether Shakespeare was a better investment than turnips. "Eliza," he said, and then he stopped, because the rain was loud and the school had no roof. And he was a man who had spent 4 years not saying things, and the habit of silence is the hardest one to break. "Say it," she said. "Whatever it is, say it, before you build another wall around it." "I did not follow you into the rain because of the letter. I followed you because you walked past me like I was furniture. No woman has ever walked past me like I was furniture, and I needed to know why. Because you were a stranger my father was selling me to. And now? Now you are the man who slept on a settee and helped me plant rosemary, and read Shakespeare in a room where his mother died." She took a breath. The rain was cold on her face, but the words were warm in her throat, and she was done. Done waiting, done calculating, done treating her heart like a ledger that needed to balance. "Now you are the man I love, and I am furious about it, because it was not part of the plan." "You planned not to love me?" "I planned to manage your household for 3 months and leave with £50 and a reference. Falling in love with a duke who cannot throw away his mother's Shakespeare was not in the spreadsheet." He kissed her. In the doorway of a school with no roof, in the rain, with construction debris around their feet and mud on both their boots. His hands were on her face, and his mouth was warm, and the rain was cold, and she kissed him back with the thoroughness of a woman who had finally decided that some irreversible decisions were the only ones worth making. When they pulled apart, the rain was slowing. A thin line of sunlight broke through the western clouds, catching the wet stone of the schoolhouse and turning it briefly gold. "I should tell you," he said, his forehead against hers, "that I was going to refuse your father's terms. That first day, I rode to Hampshire to meet you and refuse him." "Then why did you follow me?" "Because you left before I could refuse, and I realized that the refusal was no longer the point." He pulled back enough to look at her. "The point was you, standing in the rain, walking away from everything that was safe, because safe was not the same as right. I followed you because I recognized you." "Recognized me?" "Someone who writes letters about drainage and swallows and cannot stop fixing what is broken. I have been looking for that person for 4 years. I just did not know it until she walked past me in a morning dress and did not look back." Eliza put her hand on his chest. She could feel his heartbeat. Fast, faster than his calm voice suggested, the body telling the truth that the composure tried to edit. "I have conditions," she said. "Of course you do." "I will not give up managing the estate." "I would not dare ask." "I will not become decorative. I will continue to kneel in mud and argue with Mrs. Crawford, and catalogue your library and build this school." "I expect nothing less." "And I will write letters to my sister about swallows whenever I please." "I will frank them personally." He kissed her forehead. "Any other conditions?" "One. The folio stays in the library. It is not sold, not ever, not for any debt, any crisis, any reason." His arms tightened around her. She felt the breath leave him, a long, shuddering exhale that carried 4 years of held grief and released it into the rain-washed air. "Agreed," he said. "All of it. Every condition. Anything else you think of between now and—" "Now and what?" "Now and the wedding." "Is that a proposal?" It is a statement of inevitability. The proposal will come with better weather and a ring, but the inevitability is now. She pressed her face into his shoulder and laughed, and the laugh vibrated through both of them, and the half-built school stood around them like a promise that was still becoming itself. The wedding was small. This was Eliza's preference. She wanted the vicar, Margaret, and her curate, Mrs. Blackwell, Mrs. Crawford, who cried and slammed no cabinets, and the tenants who came because they wanted to, not because they were expected to. So Gerald was not invited. He learned about it from the newspaper announcement, which Eliza had worded with the precise, surgical politeness of a woman who understood that the cruelest thing you can do to a man who tried to sell you is succeed without him. 6 months later, on a morning in early autumn, Eliza stood in the south field and watched the harvest come in. The field that had been flooded for 6 years was producing wheat, golden, heavy-headed, bending in a wind that smelled of turned earth and approaching rain. Because it was Hampshire, and it was always approaching rain. The Duke came up behind her. She heard him before she felt him, his boots on the path, the particular rhythm of his walk that she could now distinguish from every other footfall on the estate. He put his arms around her and rested his chin on the top of her head, and they stood together and watched the field that her letter had described and his plans had designed and her hands had fixed. "The swallows are back," she said. She pointed toward the barn, where a pair of birds was looping in wide arcs, catching insects in the golden light. "4th year, same beam." Loyalty or habit? She leaned back into him. His warmth was steady and constant, the warmth of a man who had learned to hold on instead of hold back. And she was wearing his cloak, the same oilskin from the first night, now kept by the front door as a talisman rather than a garment. "Both," she said. "Loyalty is just habit that has decided it means something." The wheat bent, the swallows turned. The rain held off for 1 more hour, and then it came, because it always came, and they did not go inside. If you have ever walked out of a place that was supposed to be your home, if you have ever chosen the rain over the roof because the roof was costing you yourself, then you know what Eliza knew that morning. Home is not the house. Home is the person who follows you into the storm and does not ask you to come back. Home is the field you fix together. Home is the argument about dairy yields that ended in laughter. Home is the school with no roof, where you said the thing you were afraid to say, and the rain stopped, and the light came through. If this story felt like coming home, I would love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, what moment caught you? The letter about swallows? The kitchen garden? The doorway in the rain? Every comment helps this channel grow, and every story I tell here is for the people who find it. And if you have not yet subscribed, come sit by the fire. There is always room, and there is always another story waiting.